Born to a Caucasian father and a Hispanic mother as the second child of the couple, she seemed like she was the newfound light of their lives. With joy and excitement in their eyes during her birth, they turned to look into her tiny face for the first time, and that was when they saw it. The shocking discovery that their baby had a very striking appearance neither of them could explain. It turns out the clinic had made an unthinkable error. This is the story of a fertility clinic's unthinkable mistake, a procedure horribly gone wrong, and a case that raises profound questions about the ethics of reproductive technology and the devastating consequences of human error.
A sperm mix-up with heartbreaking consequences. Genetic history and makeup is nowhere to be found in his daughter's DNA.
It's hard to explain the shock and agony when you find out that someone you love and care for, your own daughter, is not genetically related to you.
Thomas and Nancy were just like any other couple dreaming of a bigger family. They had turned to a fertility clinic, trusting them to guide them towards their heart's desire. But what they didn't know was that their story was far from unique. In fact, fertility mix-ups were becoming increasingly common and was a hidden crisis that rarely made the news. A Washington Post report revealed that dozens of families in the US alone have been affected by misused or misplaced sperm each year. And the Andrews were just one of the unlucky ones whose story had hit the headlines. But their journey wasn't without warning signs and subtle clues that were overlooked until it was too late. To understand the full extent of their ordeal, let's rewind to the beginning, when their hopes were high and the future seemed full of promise. The Andrews were a picture-perfect couple, living the ideal city lifestyle in a peaceful New York neighborhood. Both were from humble backgrounds. They had met in college, brought together by their similar beliefs and passion for family. The couple had always known they wanted to have a large family from the time they married each other. One could say that because they had both been raised in large, close-knit families, they wanted the same for themselves. Their first child had been born without any complications 3 years after they were married, a beautiful baby boy, Jacob. He was the light of their lives. But when they tried to have a second child, things didn't go as smoothly as expected. They tried for 2 years, hoping that each month would bring good news. But as their dreams kept meeting with disappointment, they sought medical advice. Their doctor recommended fertility treatments, a solution neither of them had seen coming, but one that now seemed like their only option. The Andrews quickly descended into a world of hormone injections, strict schedules, and invasive procedures. Their initial attempt at fertility treatments was unsuccessful. As numerous rounds of IU insemination had failed to produce a pregnancy, they couldn't even keep counts of the number of negative pregnancy tests they had to endure, because at some point it felt like each test was a little dagger piercing their heart. After another year, their doctor recommended in vitro fertilization, a more complex and costly procedure, but one with higher success rates. IVF would give them a better chance, but it would also be a huge emotional and financial commitment. For Thomas and Nancy, it seemed worth the risk. So they met with a fertility clinic known for its advanced techniques and reassuring success stories. The New York Medical Services for Reproductive Medicine, or NYMSRM, the clinic was modern, reputable, and radiated expertise, or so they thought. There were subtle signs from the onset that, in fact, should have raised red flags for the couple. The Andrews had always been diligent in their medical decisions, but when they ventured into reproductive treatments, they experienced situations over which they had little control. It was at first overwhelming for both of them. Though they dreaded admitting it, they had to place so much trust in the nurses and doctors because they didn't really know what goes on behind the scenes of fertility clinics. Nancy remembered the first troubling moment was a mislabeling incident. She had gotten a call one afternoon from the clinic saying there had been a mix-up with the paperwork. They had told her it was a minor administrative error. So the clinic apologized for sending them the wrong set of documents, ones that belonged to another couple with a similar last name. Nancy shrugged it off at the time, chalking it up to a busy clinic handling hundreds of cases. After all, fertility clinics were pressured, high-volume environments, but that small mix-up planted a seed of doubt in her. Still, the couple moved forward, determined to stay positive. They followed all the instructions to the letter: hormonal treatments, daily injections, scheduled monitoring. Yet one delay after another kept pushing their embryo transfer further down the calendar. The clinic told them it was due to timing complications, but each delay seemed like an unspoken sign that something wasn't quite right. However, after a series of postponements, the day finally arrived when they would have the embryo transfer done. Their embryos had been fertilized with Thomas's sperm and Nancy's eggs. They were relieved and excited about the prospect of having their second child in their arms. The day of the insemination started like any other at the fertility clinic. It had been a long, tiring road with 2 years of fruitless efforts, several medical appointments, and a lot of paperwork. But that morning, they just hoped for the best outcome. But the clinic was as busy as usual, and they had been granted an early appointment, yet the wait seemed to drag on and on. There were so many other couples there with similar issues, and it made them realize they were all the same, hoping and waiting for their chance at happiness. After what seemed like stretches of hours, the couple was called to a small clean room. Thomas and Nancy paid little attention to their surroundings because their thoughts were fixed on what they had come for and how it would take place. They were told that Nancy's eggs had been successfully harvested and fertilized with Thomas's sperm, and it was now time for the embryo transfer. The physician in charge had a calm and competent look on his face. He went on to describe the procedure one final time and assure the couple that everything was going well. They sat close to each other, carefully clutching hands as it began. The insemination was quick and straightforward. Nancy had a peculiar mix of feelings as they left the clinic later that day. She still felt uncertain and recalled feeling something was strange, but assumed it was just her nerves at work. After all, it would be unsensible to be worried at this stage. However, they had no idea that a grave error had already happened behind the scenes. Patients often do not understand how fertility clinics operate. After the collection of sperm and eggs, a delicate, highly technical process happens which requires precise accuracy. In the case of the Andrews, this accuracy failed at the most critical point where it should have been implemented. The clinic had a large flow of patients that day, and the lab attendants were working under immense pressure. While this was practical, it was far from flawless. That day, a series of seemingly little mistakes that ran unchecked that day would lead to a disastrous consequence. It all began with a sperm sample that had been mislabeled. Thomas's sperm had been kept alongside samples from many other donors, all of whom were scheduled to undergo various procedures that day. One of the attendants, who was new to the clinic and still inexperienced with the rules, had labeled Thomas's sample incorrectly. To make matters worse, the clinic's regular double-checking routine was overlooked in order to keep up with the day's hectic workload. Nobody realized that the sperm used to fertilize Nancy's eggs was not from Thomas, but from another donor. The fertilization procedure had gone as expected. The clinic's embryologists kept track of the embryo's progress, and when it came to time for the transfer, everything looked to be fine. However, the embryos implanted in Nancy's womb were the result of someone else, not her husband. Someone she had never met and will likely never meet, whose name would remain unknown. In the weeks following the regimen, Nancy and Thomas experienced a fit of emotions. The wait to find out if the IVF had been effective was stressful, and fortunately, it had yielded positive results when the good news arrived that Nancy was pregnant. Or rather, unfortunately, the next 9 months felt like a dream. Despite their earlier doubts, they let go of their worries as Nancy's pregnancy progressed without complications. They even started picking out names for the unborn. They spent their weekends decorating the nursery, painting the walls a neutral pale yellow, buying toys, and picturing what life would be like once their new bundle of joy arrived. The pregnancy went like pregnancies go. Morning sickness, exhaustion, and mood changes. Each doctor's checkup had indicated that the baby was growing normally. Their ultrasound confirmed a good heartbeat, and the couple was able to view the indistinct shape of their baby's tiny body on the screen. It was the greatest feeling in the world. They were over the moon. But as the months passed, Nancy's little seed of uncertainty from the day of the transfer grew stronger. She could not understand why, but something about the pregnancy seemed off. Thomas sensed Nancy's mounting anxiety but did not know how to assist. He continually assured her that everything was fine and that she was probably overthinking. They were finally about to have another kid, just like they had always hoped. There was no reason to worry, but deep down, Thomas himself couldn't shake the odd feeling that everything was not quite fine. On the 12th of October 2004, 9 months after she got pregnant, Nancy went into labor. So they raced to the hospital with their luggage packed, eager to welcome their new baby into the world. Then, at around 2:28 p.m., after a few hours of labor, baby Jessica was born. She was a lovely, healthy girl. However, the delight and excitement of that day were soon replaced by doubt. Nancy's heart sank as she saw her daughter's face. Jessica's skin was far darker than she had anticipated, and her features looked strange, especially the hair. She later remembered looking at her and thinking, this could not be right, and tried to brush it off. Thomas too was disturbed but tried to remain hopeful. He thought it was just the lighting in the room or something, but deep down he was worried. It didn't seem possible that anything could be wrong. Genetics were tricky after all, and they were told over and over again not to worry about the baby's appearance. The doctors assured them that babies often look different at birth and that Jessica's appearance would change as she grew. But the couple were not satisfied with the explanation, so they turned to a Manhattan obstetrician, Dr. Martin Keltz, for answers. However, he too dismissed the couple's worries, telling them that Jessica's darker skin tone was merely an abnormality that would get lighter over time. but they were now even more concerned. After all, they had expected Jessica to resemble them, and the difference in skin tone was too noticeable to overlook. Still, they tried to believe the doctor's explanation that Jessica would assume the expected physical features as she grew, but Jessica's skin tone did not change, and her hair became thicker and curlier, unlike either of her parents. Now, their friends and relatives had begun making embarrassing comments, such as questioning if the baby was adopted, or if Nancy had been seeing someone else, or if there was someone in the family with darker skin. And on each occasion, the couple had no idea what to reply. Thomas initially tried to ignore the questions, but the more he looked at his daughter, the more uncomfortable he felt. His infant bore no resemblance to him. It began to eat away at him. He adored and loved her, no doubt, but he could not shake the feeling that something was amiss. By the time Jessica was 6 months old, the tension in the Andrews home had reached a breaking point. Nancy and Thomas had stopped talking about their curiosities, but the silence between them became more intense with each passing day. Finally, at the advice of their family doctor, they agreed to go for a DNA test. It was a basic swab test, quick and painless. However, the wait for the results felt like a lifetime. They did not talk about it because they were both afraid of what the outcome would be. Would it ease their turmoil, or would it confirm their greatest fear? However, when the DNA results arrived, it proved what the couple had suspected all along. Thomas was not Jessica's biological father. They felt like the world had fallen apart, and everything they had believed about their family, about their daughter, was all a lie. Nancy was equally devastated. She felt like she had failed. How could this happen? How could they not have known? The couple immediately contacted the fertility clinic, demanding answers. But what they got was a defensive administrative response. The clinic maintained that their procedures were flawless and that any errors must have been on the couple's part. It was not until months later, following a thorough inquiry, that the truth was revealed. During the IVF, the clinic had mistakenly used sperm from an unidentified donor, hence, their daughter was not biologically connected to Thomas. But the clinic had no explanation for how or why this error had occurred. They had trusted the fertility clinic with the most sensitive and personal details of their lives, and the clinic had let them down. Even though Jessica was their daughter in every meaningful aspect, the fact that she was not Thomas's biological child hovered over them like a heavy cloud. In addition to the fact that she was born with another man's sperm, they also had to cope with the emotional and mental effect this had on their family. Thomas loved her, of course, but there was the constant reminder that she wasn't his child, not in the way he had expected her to be. Nancy also struggled with feelings of guilt and anger. As Jessica got older, the couple had to make the tough decision of whether or not to tell her the truth. They did not want her to feel like she did not belong. They understood, however, that she would eventually have questions. They owed her the truth. Though they would eventually take legal action against the clinic, the emotional harm had already been done. What followed was a gradual erosion of trust in the system that was supposed to help them. It was an IVF nightmare that shattered their world. Now the Andrews family, saddened to learn that the child they had lovingly brought into the world was not biologically related, sought justice in the judicial system. In 2007, they filed a case in Manhattan Supreme Court against the fertility clinic that performed Nancy's IVF. The claims consisted of negligence and mental suffering, making demands of accountability for the clinic's grave blunder. Thomas also lamented that this was not just a mistake, it was a violation of his family. The lawsuit named the clinic's director, Dr. Reginald Puckett, and Carlo Acosta, the embryologist who allegedly mixed up the sperm samples during the fertilization process. The complaint accused the clinic and its staff of gross negligence and demanded damages for mental distress caused by the mix-up. During the trial, 3 additional DNA tests indicated that Thomas Andrews was not Jessica's actual father, though Nancy was her genetic mother. The couple's attorney, Howard Stern, noted that the family was not just emotionally distraught by the knowledge that Thomas was not the biological father, but also because the sperm donor was of a different race. The tests had indicated Nancy's egg had been fertilized with sperm from an African-American donor. They were not just frightened by the misunderstanding, but also by the possible consequences for their daughter's future. The Andrews claimed that they were emotionally wounded by the botched procedure and the possible long-term consequences it will have on Jessica, who would grow up in a home where her physical appearance was greatly different from her parents and siblings. The courts faced a tough decision since the case was a novel one about emotional distress in the jurisdiction of IVF errors. The Andrews family was so saddened by the news that they tried to keep the details hidden from many of their relatives. They worried that since they were already experiencing awkward looks from people and offensive questions from strangers, the same was definitely bound to happen to her as she got older and would only become more pronounced by then. In their lawsuit, the parents were also concerned that the unknown African American donor's sperm had also been used for other couples and perhaps caused more anguish for other families. According to it, she would never know or be able to determine the identity of her actual father, and would consequently never be able to know her full medical history and condition. They were also concerned that Jessica's biological father, the unknown sperm donor, might one day come forward and seek custody of her. So there was continuing uncertainty because there was the theory that since the genetic material of either or both of them might have been inappropriately used for others, they may have natural children or half-children that they were unaware of. They would have to deal with the unsettling prospect that they had other biological children or that Thomas's biological kid was being raised by someone else without their knowledge. Their attorney made it clear to the court that the case was more than a medical mistake and was about the long-term implications of the clinic's incompetence on Jessica and her family. Nancy and Thomas had always pictured a future in which their family was complete, where they could see their children grow and excel without the weight of such a devastating incident. But now, that future seems uncertain. The presiding judge, Sheila Abdus Salam, allowed the Andrews mental distress claim to go to trial and granted the Andrews family a partial victory. She ruled that the case could proceed to trial against the clinic, the embryologist Carlo Acosta, and the clinic's director, Dr. Reginald Puckett, on the grounds of negligence and emotional distress. However, the judge dismissed the part of the lawsuit against Dr. Martin Keltz, the obstetrician who had reassured the couple about Jessica's complexion. Since he wasn't involved in the fertilization process itself, he was not held responsible for the error. Although their case against New York Medical Services for Reproductive Medicine may result in some form of accountability, the suffering they have gone through cannot be undone by a court decision or monetary settlement. To get more on stories like these, make sure to like and subscribe.